let's get to the tail end of your hell and then heaven encounter. You're sent back, and you are, I guess, for lack of a better way to say it, we could say you are thrust back into your body. So tell us about leaving heaven and waking up back in your bedroom.
Well, it was very disappointing. Here's what I saw. I watched as I was kicked out of heaven. Talk about rejection. I have rejection issues. No,
Don't let the gate hit you. Just saying.
that's right. But I had to go back, and I knew I had to go back so that I could go back to heaven for good. And I knew I was on a mission when I got back. So I'm coming back into my body, and I'm in the room, and I'm seeing this. There's these two paramedics, and it's not in the book, so you get to hear this. There's these. Well, they didn't call them paramedics back then; they were just ambulance drivers back then. I don't think they called them paramedics. One kind of tall, thin guy, and another shorter, stockier man. And the shorter, stockier man had already come over and checked. And he turned around, and looked at the other guy, and he like shaking his head. No, man, this guy's dead. I was the blood was starting to coagulate in my wrist and in my elbow. Because when he went to move it just a little bit, it wasn't real stiff, but it was stiffening up. It wasn't just like flopping real quick. And so rigor mortis was already beginning to set in just a little bit. And, I was dead. I mean, so far gone. They just walked out of the room. They were calling the morgue. They had dial-up phones back then, that connected to the thing. And the other guy had a radio, and the radio wouldn't work in that apartment right. So he went to use my phone. And the taller guy said, hey, you might want to, because there's a girl in the apartment. He goes, you might want to just kind of check him to make sure he's not bleeding someplace, that she hasn't committed some crime or something. So he comes walking back in there, and he goes to put his hand down underneath my side, to just check, to look, see if there's any blood any place. Well, when that happened, I came back to life. I came into my body. Well, when I came into my body, it was like I couldn't breathe. I'm like, and I'm like, and so my whole body started vibrating like it got shocked with 240 volts. It was just like, and I'm like, I couldn't talk really. And this guy jumped back. I keep joking and say, well, hey, scared him to death, scared me to life. But he kind of jumped back, and he's just kind of looking at me, and I'm like, and I'm trying to talk, and my jaws don't want to work. My tongue's not working right. My eyes are real dry, and I'm like, because my eyes were open anyways, but it's just a weird feeling, and nothing wanted to work right for quite a little while, and I'm trying to talk, and I'm trying to say things. I'm trying to breathe, and I'm trying to talk, and they're trying to say, we need to take you to the hospital. Yeah, we're going to have to get to, and no, that was the first word I could get out was no. And I'm trying to move, and I can't really move. And finally I struggle with it, and they get me up out of the bed, and because I told them I got to stand up. And they're like trying to check me. They're putting a blood pressure thing on me. They're trying to do whatever they can. I'm going, no, I could say no. And finally I was saying, leave. And I could get the word leave out. And finally I just told them to get out of there. I finally started being able to speak, not clearly. It was weird. Even my voice sounded strange, and it was kind of hoarse sounding. And I finally got them over to the front door. I walked enough to get it. And it was a shaky walk, believe me. It was a weird walk because my bones were all stiffened up or something. They didn't move correctly. My brain's telling it to move. My legs going, I ain't moving. And finally they started moving. So everything started working again, just right. And so they left. And I kicked the girl out too. I grabbed her purse and her jacket and gave it to her, and she left. It was cold out there. I wasn't going to make her leave without her jacket, And so everybody was left. I have to be honest with you. I had a lot of drugs in my apartment, and the cocaine was easy to flush, but marijuana does not flush. Okay. You have to, when you put it in the commode, you have to put tons of toilet paper on it and wet it to get it to flush, because it just won't go down. So I'm trying to get rid of all of this stuff because I want nothing to do with it. I mean, I knew that I was never going to go back to that lifestyle. So after I got rid of the drugs, dumped the booze that I had there, I had a little bit of alcohol there in the house, in her beer that she brought over, and I dumped all that out down the kitchen sink. I had an avocado green rocking chair from the 70s. You're too young to probably remember those, but I had one of those, and it was a low back, and it didn't have a real high back on it, and that thing would rock back and forth and swivel around. I sat in that thing and I rocked and I cried. Brother, I cried so hard because I had a second chance. You know, I wasn't going to stay in hell. I have a second chance, you know, and I'm thinking of all these things and I'm just crying and I'm just crying out to God, forgive me, God, forgive me, forgive me. How could I have been so foolish? How could I have been so stupid? I mean, I'm being blunt. That, to me, that's stupid and so foolish as to just do that, to walk away from you, God. And I cried and I wept and I cried and I sat in that rocking chair and I cried for hours. I cried until 6:30 in the morning. And this was around midnight when I started, a little after midnight. And it was until 6:30 in the morning. I cried. I mean, I went through a whole box of Kleenex. You know, I snotted up real good. You know, it's something that when you go through that experience, you know, and then the angel had said, I can't talk about it. Now, I could say that I died. And I could say I went to hell and I went to heaven. And I could say a little bit that, you know, I saw some things in hell. I didn't go into details and I saw some things in heaven. I was released and allowed to go to heaven. So I went to the hospital to tell the doctor because it was important that the doctor, I had to know whether I was going crazy or what. And the doctor sat there and I'll never forget. I went there and told him, and he sits up in his chair, you know, he had an office in there. It was about the size of a closet, you know, and he sat there and folded his hands up and he sat forward and he leaned in and he looked at me and he said, listen, he says, I believe that what you went through was real. I'm not saying that I think you think it was real. I believe that what you went through was real. I've had patients tell me they went to hell. I've had patients tell me they went to heaven, but you're the first one that went to both. And he says, most of them are only dead for a few seconds. So he says, you had a real experience. And he says, from all indications from what you told me, and then later on, he found out I had been dead for about 3 hours is what they estimated. And he goes, yeah, you know, you were, you went there.